Aren't an explicit podcast. We couldn't even get past your Instagram handle.
Yeah.
So we are talking today with
hmm
Joe Howdyshell, also known as at Badass Coach on Instagram. Although recently you have migrated, perhaps permanently, perhaps for some amount of time, over to Substack, where we can find you as Joe Howdyshell, right? That's what we're called over on Substack. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's like coachhowdy.substack
mm.
or whatever, however they do that.
And yeah, you run Summit Endurance Academy, and tell me what you do. Tell me, what do you do over at Summit Endurance Academy? What is your raison d'être?
So these days, mostly it's mountain sports. So, like, I mean, I would say, well, to back up a little bit, my raison d'etre is certainly I I have this like itch that I want people to understand the cost of their choices. And so I want people to understand that if they're not as fast as they could be, it's because they're prioritizing something else. Because I think that the kind of like empowerment that comes from understanding that, like, yeah, I could be really fucking fast if I put the work in, I think is a kind of confidence that not enough people have, in my estimation.
Mhm.
And so that's like the bigger picture of what drives me to coach and what drives me to be a complete fucking nerd about this stuff. And how that has translated into an actual marketable career um, has somewhat been a factor of where I live, but also a factor of the sports that I kind of got into. And it's mostly these days I coach, like, pretty much everybody is ski mountaineering racing in the winter,
Mhm.
which is for listeners who don't know is essentially like backcountry ski racing ish esque type thing. If you've ever heard of somebody talking about like going uphill on skis or skinning,
Mhm.
that's the racing form of that is what I coach. And then in the summers, I coach more and more road biking these days, but mostly mountain biking and mountain running.
Mhm.
And then every once in a while, I'll have, I get some random stuff in there.
Yeah.
I do have an athlete training for a half Ironman right now. I coached back when the back when the Spartan Warriors, like the pro Spartan Warriors, actually had contracts with NBC Sports. I coached a pro Spartan racer for a little
Cool.
bit. Yeah, I worked with a pro motocross racer for a bit. I've been kind of everywhere, and I do a lot. But these days, it's mostly like, so I live in Breckenridge, Colorado. I'm just surrounded by mountains,
Mhm.
and it's mostly the athletes who want to play in the mountains that look like mine. I coach athletes all over the country, and probably a majority are not local at this. Well, no, I bet I'm like 20% local at this point. But it's those kind of sports that I really like to do that you can do really well here
Mhm.
that end up taking most of my coaching time.
Nice. And so that's where you are now. And I always like to refer, I mean, endurance sports sort of is this odd island of misfit toys. How did you arrive on these shores? Like, how did you get involved in these sports? How did you get involved in coaching? Like, yeah, what led you to this particularly lucrative and fame oriented
Yeah.
pastime?
I so my dad played high school, or no, sorry, college football.
Mhm.
And we were like fairly traditional family, like dad liked football a lot. Um I watched football. I loved football. Uh, as a freshman in high school, I wanted to play football, and my parents looked at me and they were like, "You, you are 85 pounds soaking fucking wet.
Okay.
No, you cannot go play football." My parents had so my dad ran track also. He was mostly like a middle distance, short distance guy. But my mom also ran. I don't think he ran in college, but he ran in high school. And then my mom ran in college, and they actually like met at a 5K. And so they were like, "Hey, look, like just maybe until you're bigger, just go run cross country." And I had swam competitively a little bit. I played baseball, and I played soccer until high school. And then I kind of got thrown to the wolves on that first season of cross country, and lots of good stories there. But by the end of the season, I was second fastest on the team, eighth in the state, and then really haven't looked back from there. Like after that, we had cross country skiing as part of high school, and so a bunch of friends told me that I should do that. I was going to do basketball instead. And then this like hot new girl came to school and she did cross country skiing. And I was like, yeah, I think I should do cross country skiing. And I was terrible at it at first, and then did track, and then ended up doing that slew of activities for 4 years. At the end of high school, I went to West Point for my first 2 years of college. Didn't want to cross country ski, so I walked on to. I was one of like. Out of like 150 kids, there were two of us. There was me and Sean Kim. Shout out to Sean Kim. We were the only two who managed to walk onto this team. And so I did cross country and indoor. And by the end of that, I was like, this sucks. It was like a super high mileage program. Almost all running was done on pavement. I came from a low mileage program done mostly on trails. And it was just like it was a huge team, and the coach Jerry Quiller had coached. He had coached at CU to national championships before that, and then he went to he was used to working with, guys running 350 for a mile, or like low to mid three, or mid threes for the 1500, and I was like I ran a 9:42 mile in high school, so it was at 6,000 feet. So that was solid, but I was certainly a step below what he was used to coaching, and so I just kept getting hurt and kept getting hurt and kept getting hurt and kept getting hurt. Called up the woman who was in charge of the cross country ski team. She said it's too late for us to be teaching somebody how to ski, and I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And so I hopped on that team, did really well, trained really hard for that the next year, ended up second and third at the two races at nationals, decided I wanted to take a shot at the Olympics, transferred back to University of Wyoming. Instead of finding Olympic fame, I found girls and beer, which they do not have at West Point. Not entirely
or in the Olympics, sadly.
Or in the, well, they have the nice girls. Not so much the beer. So I transferred back to University of Wyoming, and really from there, I guess to step back, so that was kind of the athletic journey, and then chased cross country skiing for a long time. It was a solid, low level elite, high level amateur kind of area. But that second year at West Point, we didn't really have a coach, and I was the most experienced cross country skier, and as a high schooler, I was a contentious little shit, and thought that my high school running coach, who loved to give these like physiology presentations, I was like, this is all bullshit. You're wrong. So I started my own like anatomy and physiology studies, independent study. I got credits for them and everything. And that was about the time like the internet was starting, and Dr. Steven Seiler had built this whole website. He basically like published a book, like web page at a time, called the Masters Athletic Performance Project or something like that, like the MAPP. I printed off the whole website. I still have this binder somewhere. And I just started like collecting resources and learning about training. And so
Yeah.
then when I went to West Point, not only was I the most educated or the most experienced cross country skier, I also knew a fair bit about training. And so once I left, West Point doesn't have anything as soft and communist as like biology or physiology. So when I went back to University of Wyoming, they had a physiology program, and
Mhm.
so I left the left all the aerospace engineering credits behind and started brand new, and ended up getting bachelor's and master's in exercise physiology. And after school, I moved to Colorado to essentially to be a cross country ski bum at
Mhm.
Devil's Thumb Ranch. And then after that, got the job of a big like youth and community club here in Summit County, Colorado. Did that for 4 years before I got burnt out, making like half of a living wage. Went back to bartending for a year or two, and then started the Summit Endurance Academy in February of 2016, and I've just been running with that for the last, I guess, 8.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny that like, I mean, your story, this is great. Everyone out there, don't become an endurance coach. Like, it's really
Yeah.
fun. You learn a lot. You have incredible experiences. It's a tough road. And like, yours is so you could like sub out different aspects of your story for, I think like a lot of endurance coaches, mine has the same sort of odd magpie-ish thing. Um, my background is all in the humanities, but the first question I want to ask, like based off of what you were just talking about, so you come from this like engineering background. What are the skills and like perspective that like came from that engineering background that you feel like you've been able to deploy in like the coaching and endurance side of things? Like I guess the
Ooh.
question I'm asking is like, we all have unique backgrounds, but then we all train those unique backgrounds onto a pastime that a lot of people do. What is it about your engineering background that you have brought over into this realm?
Great question. I've always kind of described myself as like a born systems engineer. So and this, the like mechanical and aerospace stuff that I was working on at West Point weren't like tightly around that. But I remember like the fascinating parts of like statics and dynamics and
Mhm.
looking at like what are the weaknesses, what are the fail points of a structure. And what is and so then like you take that into like more of a systems engineering kind of approach, and you're looking at like whether it's um, a a sewage system or the drains in your house or a like a manufacturing assembly line, right?
Mhm.
You're looking at what are the weak points. Like here's all of these pieces, all of these things in this system that has some inputs and some outputs. And what happens if we tweak this input? And what happens if we change this assumption? And what happens if we increase the capacity of this little piece? Which is exactly what endurance training is, right? It's like, okay, we've got this human system. It has all of these inputs, like what happens when we increase training? What happens when we increase carbohydrates? What happens when we decrease stress? And then you have these outputs, which are these, whether it's performance in a workout or how good did you feel
Mhm.
or performance in a race or whatever. And so I think that probably would be the biggest thing. The second thing is the math helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think like when you're learning, when you're doing like a really deep dive into the physiology, sometimes it can like I can't tell you how many times in my physiology classes it helped so much to be able to look at like the cardiovascular Fick equation and be like, yeah, I totally understand all of the math behind this. And other
Yeah.
people are like, wait, but what's the equals sign mean? Um, and so that I would say is probably like the
Yeah.
second useful part.
Yeah, as somebody who I think I took 8 credits outside of the English and drama departments in college
Yep.
over,
Yep.
and like, like the school I went to was basically 1 credit is 1 class. So, by
Yep.
the end of the 4 years, you're going to have like 36 credits total around that.
Yep.
So that gives you a
Totally.
sense of like how not mathy I
Yeah. Yes. Uh-huh.
um, and yeah, it would be, I think, also growing up in the 1990s, before learning differences were like a thing, like an
Hmm.
accepted thing that you would address and do something about.
Hmm.
I definitely would, I was basically labeled as innumerate. And
Okay.
so
Yep.
like, sort of like, like, here's the sonnet. You
Yeah.
can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my math, all of my math has sort of come hard won, and I'm
Hmm.
jealous that
Yeah. Yeah.
of more of that. My next, my yeah, I sort of work my way through influences to present day. But one of the other things we talked about via some like Instagram chatter, was your XKCD inspired infographics, which I
Hmm.
just find so different than a lot of the stuff you see on Instagram. You're
Hmm.
going black and white. You're using a lot of space. You're using a very sort of handwritten kind of font style. And I was just wondering if you could kind of, walk me through like how you arrived at that as your particular tactic for conveying information.
The short answer is whiskey. The long answer is so I have always really tried to and I think I heard this I think I heard this after, but I heard somebody say one time that the most information is conveyed from the writer to the reader at something like the seventh grade reading level. Like once you get much higher than that, it just there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of like trying to figure out this word, which gets in the way of the transfer of information. And so my writing has always, I think, had kind of that like spare quality. Like I
Mhm.
try not to have a whole lot of jargon. I try not to like I try to really break it down into like super simple concepts.
Mhm.
And so I think like I was those graphics came up. I've been I've been writing a book for like 2.5 years. And it's not because I've spent that much time over 2.5 years. It's just because it's taken me a long time to like come back to it after a little bit of break. And my best friend and I were doing like a little writing retreat. And and he was like, and this was probably like January of this year of 2024. And and I was just like wrestling with some concepts in the book as we were doing this like deep dive editing process. And I just kind of was like, well, like what if I, like I have a Canva subscription. Like what if I just kind of like start to pop these things together? And and I didn't even think of the XKCD thing at the time. Like I haven't read a ton of their stuff, but I fucking love it. Like it's so
Classic.
good.
Yeah.
And and I think, and honestly, I kind of think at first I wasn't sure that they were going to be the end product. I was like, how can I get together a simple enough piece of information that I could give this to an actual graphic designer and have them make something that looks
Mhm.
pretty. And I did this with like genuinely 3 or 4 glasses of whiskey, and I'm just like sitting on the couch. My buddy had gone skiing, and I'm just like thinking through like, okay, where would I want this graphic, and where would I want this graphic, and where would I want this graphic, and I made like 40 or 50 different figures for this book.
Mhm.
And by probably like halfway through, I was like, fuck, I really like these. Like I think like these they're getting better and better, and I feel like I'm like they're getting a little personality to them, and I just kind of stopped developing there. I was like, no, I think I like this. Like I think this is a really good style. I think it has a lot of ability, like you said, with all the space, there's room for me to throw jokes in there,
Yeah.
which has always been one of my favorite things. Like I also like I want it to be entertaining as well as educational. And so there's like there isn't so much information in there that it makes it hard to follow, and there isn't enough information in there that it squeezes out any potential spots for a good dick joke.
Mhm.
And and so I started like I kind of came out of that weekend and I was like, man, I'm having a lot of fun with these. What if I start like throwing these up on Instagram in little chunks instead of, because one of the challenges that I had with Instagram was I started having a ton of like roughly a year ago, a lot of success just throwing reels out there,
Mhm.
and especially reels about ski mountaineering racing. Like there's all these little skills and tips and tricks kind of stuff, and I was getting like 100,000 views a month, 200,000 views a month, but I wasn't getting many people who were understanding what I was about. They
Mhm.
were like, "Oh, you're a skills coach," and I was like, "Well, I do the skills part, but like fundamentally by training, I'm a physiologist." And so I wanted, and because like again, if we go back to my like big reasoning, like I want people to understand training
Yeah.
so that they can make informed decisions about it. And so then I was like, okay, well, how can I increase the stickiness of these posts and get people to actually like gain real information instead of so much what happens on Instagram is just pithy quotes and oversimplified quote unquote rules
Mhm.
that aren't actually fucking rules.
Right.
And so I was like, how can I like get it simple and convey some nuance and make it fun? And it just all kind of came together into like you said, this like XKCD kind of like black and white, some stick figures kind of looking thing. And it's been really fun. And that honestly is probably the thing that I am missing the most right now about not being on Instagram
Mm.
is not putting more of those up.
Got it. Yeah, because you are using them in your Substacks, like the Brick House
Exactly.
one, you've got the
Yep.
same kind of style. So you're getting to, but I
Hmm.
get it. Yeah, like there's sort of a fun, I have a love-hate relationship with Canva. Sometimes I feel like
Yep.
I'm tethered to it, like, the thing that's going to drag me under, but it is fun and it can be meditative and creative and all of that stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I detect a kind of slightly exasperated tone of voice in those posts. There is sort of a little bit of a like, come on, everybody. And I was wondering if you could talk about like, tone of voice is so important. It's
Hmm.
literally the author's attitude towards his or her subject material. And it's such a key into understanding what the author's trying to do. And I think it's one of the things that I love so much about your posts is I can hear there's like this just little edge of exasperation. I was wondering, what are you exasperated about?
And I love this because I actually had an athlete, like a potential athlete, call me and be like, so let's talk about like your feedback with workouts. Like, are you gonna like? I love your Instagram. Is that the tone that you're gonna take with my workout feedback? And I'm like, no, 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 no. I think that the thing that I am exasperated with is the amount of misinformation out there, and I think so much of it is well-meaning, but a lot of it isn't. And I think there's a lot of and, and I think it's gotten worse and worse with social media. The same way that like everything is like half-assed and dumbed down, and like so many people are trying to make a buck by telling you that they have the secret, that like this thing is bad and this thing is good and this workout is bad and you should be scared. It's that whole like I'm going to scare you into thinking you're doing it wrong so that you will pay me to do it right kind of thing. I think that is most of what I'm exasperated with. And so as a result, like I kind of, it's kind of like the number of times I've had an athlete come to me and be like, well, hey man, I've heard that, the only way I'm going to get faster is if I alternate hot baths and cold baths, and also do that with, like 900 grams of tart cherry juice at the same time. Like that's key. And I'm like, fuck, no, it's not. And that's the exact like place that comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I sort of sense that. Right? I think the reason I was like, I think you're my new best friend was I ripped off an old Tim Ferriss post called Are you hunting antelope or mice? Which then I learned is not a Tim Ferriss quote. It is a Newt Gingrich quote. And I was like, oh no. I was like bleeding heart liberal child of the 90s. Who am I? But the same thing, like it's these, there's just these like window dressings that get the appearance of helpfulness when really it might be the last tenth of the last percent. And there is so much more work to be done and so much more joy to be had by the athlete of like going out and skiing or riding their bike.
Yeah.
And because I think so many people in the endurance sport world forget that like you have to like the sport first. Like we seem to be at this point of focusing on performance before joy, which really I don't get.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you. And it's funny because I've been rereading one of my childhood loves, Calvin and Hobbes. And there was this fucking amazing quote about, because like I don't know if you're a Calvin and Hobbes fan.
Oh, yeah.
But like, the dad and his exercise. And it's fucking hilarious that I realize like I'm 41 now and I'm like, shit, I'm Calvin's dad. I'm not Calvin. Like I grew up being like feeling like I was identifying so much with Calvin. And now I'm like, fucking Calvin's dad. Because it was something about like, well, how do you know if you're having fun if you can't like watch your heart rate? And it was just like tongue in cheek, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, I completely agree. I have a twist on that. I think that depending on the athlete, I think there's a continuum of like what keeps an athlete in and enjoying it enough. And that continuum is like joy on one hand and success on the other. And it's like, because I do think there are some people who, there are some people like I've pissed off a couple people by saying like there's a difference between being an athlete and a fast exerciser.
Yeah, totally.
So there are some people who are like, I don't want to train. Like I want to race, but I don't want to train. I don't want to give up. I don't want to rest on a day when it's beautiful out and I want to go out and just enjoy this fucking ride. And so in my eyes, somebody who is not willing to follow a training plan isn't an athlete. And there's no shade thrown. There's no value judgment there. It's just a framework in my head that I use to talk about this stuff. Right. And so that person is if that person is fast because they exercise by joy and they do it a lot and they have some genetic talent, they're probably going to be pretty fast. Mm-hmm. And so that person is a fast exerciser. Yeah. But then there are other people who, like I look at, I don't know if you've seen the paper recently that came out on Christian Blumenfeld's training and nutrition. Mm-hmm. He's doing like 1,300 to 1,400 hours a week and burning like 7,000 to 8,000 calories a day. Yeah. Like there's no fucking way that a significant portion of that is joyful.
Totally.
He's like, he's like, I keep coming back to this because I enjoy the success and I like the process. And so I think like, I tend to think that those are different sides of a spectrum, and all of us, depending on the day and the sport and the time of year, kind of float somewhere in the middle there,
Yeah.
and some people, in order to stick with the sport and to be a better version of themselves, need less structure and training and success and more joy. And some people, in order to stick with it and think that its value and be the best version of themselves, need to see results.
Yeah.
And so they care a little bit less about like just the true joy of every day. But we all need some mix of that at
Yeah.
some point, I think.
Is there
Soapbox. Oh.
no, 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 no. You're on the soapbox the whole time. That's the whole that's doing. Like you can't get off the
Fair.
soapbox until I let you.
Okay. I like it. I like it.
Is there is there one of like one of your posts or your infographics or something that is a favorite? Do you have like a favorite child of those where you're like, man, I hit it out of the park with that one?
Ooh. I feel like I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's the one that I'm like the most proud of, but I find myself referring back to the C's get degrees
Hmm.
Instagram post, because it's talking a lot about like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is the difference, and this is, and actually one of the reasons why this is topical on my mind is it's the post that I just sent out, I think this morning. Is it's a lot like this, and it's about how we have this cycle of stress and rebuild. We have the workout and then we have the rest afterwards. And really what we're trying to do in a training week is we're trying to bring like we're trying to emphasize that cycle. We're trying to add stress when the body wants it and then decrease stress when the body doesn't want stress. And I think that I have been trying for literally years to make a graphic of that cycle of the like the loss in performance that follows a workout,
Hmm.
and then the increase in performance that happens with rest, and then the further increase in performance up to and beyond the initial performance that happens when you rest even a little bit more.
Hmm.
And so I think one of the reasons why I like that C's get degrees post is that's one of the first times when I was like, yeah, I fucking like that. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's such an important point that I think people don't understand. And there's a few different parts of that graph that I really like. But then and then because I liked that, I find myself, I've been using some of the graphics from that in some of my Substack posts now. Um, so yeah, maybe that one. But I don't know. I'd have to go back because there's some that I liked the most because they presented really good points well, and there
Hmm.
are some that I like because I really like the jokes that I put in them, and they just make
Totally.
me laugh and laugh. I can't really think of like what the jokes are because the jokes are also like small, but yeah.
Well, yeah, you're doing that thing. It's hard when you are trying to convey intricate information to make the humor anything other than the kind of throwaway humor that if people are paying
Right.
attention, they will catch as it's flying past. You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
you can't do both like intricate rhetoric and high comedy at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
Like, I mean, well, okay, like David Foster Wallace can, but
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but they come around once a generation.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
there are reasons they are not coaches.
right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. That one, I love that post. My very first coach, I mean, like I was similar to you, but like was not an endurance athlete for a long time and then was. I played soccer. I was actually a goalkeeper in college. I was the guy who didn't
Hmm.
run.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like um but then like, life happens and I find myself on a bicycle 5 or 6 years later. And the guy who was the communications director at the school where I worked, his name, he had a real name. Everybody called him Captain Dondo. Um, Amazing
Yes.
guy. He's one of those
Yep.
dudes who was like, at cyclocross national championships in 1976, like the second year that it happened, like he's been
Hmm.
around forever. And I remember
Hmm.
him being like, when you go out on a bike ride, that's not training. That's stimulus. Training happens on your fucking couch.
Yes. Yeah.
and and
Yep.
I've always loved that. And I think that, like I
Hmm.
saw that in your post and I was like, oh,
Hmm.
another disciple of Captain Dondo.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
So our foci are, both endurance, you're very off-road mountain, that kind of thing. I find a lot of my world to be, like any recovering triathlete, a lot of like triathlon, road cycling. I'm big into cross country skiing. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about particularly SkiMo, because I do think it's one of those things that people are just like, is that just puking on skis? I think it is. It looks like puking on skis. Um, could you talk a little bit about the different physiological demands of these mountain sports based off, in contrast to the more road sports?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and so I think first I'll contrast it against triathlon
Hmm.
because and in particular, like non-draft legal triathlon, because there's the biggest, I would say the biggest physiological distinction is the non-standard or the variable intensity.
Hmm.
And so, with a non-draft legal, especially long course triathlon, you're just kind of like getting your heart rate to a certain place and then you just leave it there, for the whole rest of the race, or your power output or your pace or whatever. And it's more about like, who doesn't slow down.
Hmm. Yeah.
And whereas the mountain sports are much more like, it's like doing an interval set all the time. Like
Hmm.
every race is an interval set, and which is kind of more like road cycling, right? Like road racing is just 30 to 200 miles of intervals.
Yeah.
It's just constant. And so in SkiMo in particular, essentially what happens is you end up with like 3 to 5 climbs of like, depending on speed and the length of the race, anywhere between like 15 to 40-minute climbs. And so unlike road racing where or like a triathlon on a hilly course where you get to like coast down,
Hmm.
you instead, get thrown into a black diamond mogul field. Um, and then there's where a lot of the skills come in. So really, I say SkiMo is 3 sports.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, you have the uphill, which is there. I would say like there is some light technique on a lot of the uphill. Courses can get pretty technical with kick turns, because the hill is so steep that you can't go straight up it. You have to zigzag across. So that introduces a technical component. If the course is generally pretty steep, it's more engine than technique. If the course flattens out a little bit, it's more like a cross country style technique. Um, what's really fascinating is that at the World Cup level, a lot of these guys are no longer like cross country skiing at all. They're just fucking running.
Yeah.
And so they'll do like they'll do. I mean, and to get you an idea of the ridiculousness of the gear that we use, the winning times of a course that's 3 to 5 climbs and like 4 to 6,000 feet of climbing at the men's elite level, that'll be an hour.
Wow.
And so, like
Yeah.
physiologically that's tough to understand, let alone when you think about skis.
Jesus.
And so the ski equipment that we're using is maybe 110% of the weight of your cross country skis.
Oh, oh, oh my
It's
goodness.
silly light.
Yeah.
Like it's so light. And so, And so as a result, it ends up being very different from like its big brother, backcountry skiing. And so if people have ever gone backcountry skiing and they're thinking like I did the first time I ever went backcountry skiing, I'm like, this isn't a fucking sport. This is like, there's just weights on my legs. This is just torture. This sucks. Because I was a elite level cross country skier, like I said, and I lived in a mountain town, and there were a bunch of people doing like SkiMo races, and they were like, you would love this. And went on a hut trip and had a set of backcountry skis, and I was like, this sucks. I hate this. Like
Yeah.
this feels so unathletic, and I love moving fast in the mountains.
Yeah.
That's my thing. And this stuff didn't feel like that. And then it wasn't until a few months later that somebody actually got me on not even a true pair of SkiMo stuff, but like at least like some light touring stuff. And I was like, oh, now I get it. I feel like an athlete now. And so really what I would say is like from a pure physiological standpoint, I don't think it's that much different from like a sprint triathlon.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you need a relatively high VO2 max. You need pretty fucking good threshold power.
Mm-hmm.
It's just pointed up.
Yeah.
And so it's just a different mode.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's definitely different from there's a lot of athletes who come in who are like fast road and trail runners, and then they think that because they're fast there, they can switch to uphill pretty quickly. And the differences in, proportionally, like the old Joyner, VO2 max interacts with lactate threshold, which interacts with running with efficiency or economy. And that kind of dictates performance, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And running on the road proportionally to all other endurance sports is much more efficiency or economy based and much less VO2 max based.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when you try to take a flat runner and turn them into an uphill runner, it doesn't quite work as well as they think, And that's where like with triathlon, if you like a bike muscles and physiology, I'd say are more similar to like uphill running and SkiMo.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's when you take out the technical aspects, he who has the highest VO2 max in a sport specific uphill mode is the fastest climber on SkiMo skis, largely. Yeah.
And then I imagine a lot of, the training, since you cannot stimulate VO2 max all the time. Well, you can for a short little while. Like, what does it look like? Is it look like, I'm sure that there is going to be, a fair amount of VO2 max stimulus, but then like, you probably also want that like threshold ability to be pretty high up there. Like that fractional utilization of VO2 max, I would imagine would also have to be strong. So what's the aspect of the pie, that gets kind of left out? Like if we go to the other, like the way other
Mm-hmm.
extreme, to talk about like iron distance triathlon, like you can't ignore the volume. You're like, no,
Right.
that's like, we can't leave out that piece of the pie. And then, we go back to like Arthur Lydiard and you're like, well, his 800-meter runners are still running 90 to 100 miles a week. And so, yeah, if the model is like, kind of like a sprint triathlon, we're talking about like an hour of pretty difficult effort, training VO2 max. We still want threshold high. Like, how do you assemble this puzzle?
Well, so I think first and foremost, it's not that dissimilar to, what I would call like a fairly standard training intensity distribution of, the vast majority of your training, something like 70 to 90% is zone 2-ish kind of in that 5-zone model. That does become a challenge when coaching most athletes because it's pretty fucking hard to be in zone 2 when you are going up a mountain already at 10,000 feet above sea level with weights strapped to your feet. Zone 2 is elusive.
Yeah.
And so we end up doing a lot of like more like cross country skiing, and or treadmill work in early phases of an athlete's development to get to the point where they can actually skin easy.
Mhm.
And then, so SkiMo actually has 5 different disciplines. There's the sprint, which is a like 5-minute race, which is you just haul ass up. You transit. You put your. It's like a skinning course, and then you have a transition zone where you have to put your skis on your back, and you run the next bit, and then you put your skis back on your feet, and you run the next bit, and then you ski down through some gates. And there's multiple heats throughout like a morning of effort there. So that's kind of one demand. And then you have a mixed relay, which is kind of similar to that, but a slightly longer course. So it ends up being like a 10-minute effort. And then you have a vertical, which is a just climb. All you're doing is trying to get from the bottom to the top of this course. Those are usually 20 to 30 minutes. And then you have the individual race, which is that like 3 to 5 climbs, 4 to 6,000 feet, 60 to 90 minute kind of range. And then you have a longer teams race where you race side by side with someone.
Oh, cool.
And that's usually like a 6 to 8,000 feet of climbing over 2 to 3 hours. And then there's some other like Tour de France style shit of like stage racing or like ultra distance stuff. But I think for most athletes, when you're training something in that, like the individual range, so the individual is kind of like the gold medal event that, 3 to 5 climbs, 4 to 6,000 feet. A lot of what you're doing is, in my eyes, is in that threshold realm. But, it always comes back to the athlete and what are their weaknesses,
Mm-hmm.
because I am always thinking about like, what's the VO2 max, what's the fractional utilization, especially for athletes who live at altitude. I find that they're very good at threshold. They're very bad at true VO2 max efforts.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to, for a lot of athletes, focus a little bit more on VO2 max. We probably drop out a little bit of that, unless they're doing sprints, we drop out a little bit of like the super high end stuff. And, there's less like, zone 6 speed type days, less anaerobic focus. But I would say for most athletes, it ends up being a kind of a fairly simple progression of, like Tuesday is a VO2 max day, Wednesday's easy, Thursday is a threshold day, Friday's easy, Saturday is some tempo, and probably a longer day, and then Sunday is easy. So it ends up being, like I don't think that I personally don't change that very much. I do think that from a volume perspective, I think that the volume gets a little overdone, especially at the like want to be elite level in the sport. There are examples like Kilian Jornet is, one of the gods of SkiMo for sure. He's won everything. And he's a famous, like massive fucking volume guy. He does like 30 hours a week. But there's a guy whose name I am blanking on right now, but who's another French guy who Kilian and this guy paired together have won like all of the big team races in the world. And this guy is super famous for training like 10 hours a week.
Love that.
And he's like twice Kilian's size and trains much less. And I've always been a low volume guy, and I, not anymore, but when I was younger, was fairly competitive with some of the best guys in the country who trained a lot. So I personally think, and some of this is skewed by a lot of the knowledge, a lot of the coaching knowledge came from cross-country skiing in the people who were cross-country skiers in the late 90s and early 2000s, who took a lot of bad lessons from, in particular, like the Norwegian training styles of the time, which is massive fucking volume. And with the fact that a lot of the races in the US are longer than that. Most of the big marquee races in the US are 3, 4, 5 hours. And so then it is much more of like, it's much more of a metabolic and logistical event than it is about, what's my 20-minute power. And so I think personally that a lot of the elite and semi-elite US racers right now would probably do better to drop their volume a little bit and
Mhm.
focus on more consistent high intensity work.
Mhm.
Um, but right now there are a lot of people who are just throwing down massive volume. And so that ends up being a lot of the narrative around training in the US right now.
Got it. Maybe that will feed kind of into my final question. I feel like we could keep talking for another hour, but we won't.
Yeah.
um, Biggest misconception that is frustrating you as a coach right now, in terms of what is floating around out there. We all have our pet peeves. What's the one that it wakes you up at night enraged?
Oh my God.
You can only pick one.
Picking one, yeah, is the challenge. Um, I think the one that is the most frustrating to me right now, and yeah, I think the one that is like keeping me awake and frustrating me the most right now is the concept that how much you weigh could in any fucking world be as important as how fit you are. And thus, because I think that the thing that I see so many times, and I just saw this really interesting study about like it was like Boston Marathon or something like that, and they were looking at like energy availability status of athletes coming into the race, and they looked at like you know inputs and outputs for like 6 weeks leading into the Boston Marathon, and they were like interesting. Low energy availability, like the amount of caloric debt uh, was very strongly correlated with body mass and negatively correlated with performance. It was like, hey, guess what? Yeah, you got fucking lighter. You also got slower
Yeah.
because training requires fuel. And so many of the gains that we're seeing now is not because athletes are fucking lighter. It's because they're all of a sudden eating so much more than we knew than we used to. But there's still this. There's so I mean, and obviously it's so fucking complicated and so nuanced, and there's so much like Western culture and in particular American culture and and like toughness culture and like so many different factors lead into people thinking that it's like that there's like an inherent nobility in being able to do more with less. And it's like, no, dude, it just makes you fucking slow.
Yeah.
It makes you recover like shit. It makes your quality workouts like shit. And okay, yeah, maybe your weight was a little bit lower, but you're not fast.
Yeah.
And so like one of my big like, and I have this all the time, and because at the same time, like I totally understand where people come to this because we're a fat fucking country. Like most of the people, like it's like 70% obesity rate or something like that. And so like, yeah, there's a lot of people are struggling with overeating and like weight gain and like I mean I'm still fairly lean, but I'm like 197 pounds right now. I was just filling out I'm on my wife's insurance because again, coaches are millionaires.
Yeah, right.
Oh wait, we're not.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm on my wife's insurance, and they asked me. There's this like questionnaire, and it was like height and weight, and they were like, "Oh, you're overweight. Are you interested in fixing it?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm like 106, 197 pounds, but like you fucking like you're hard to find someone as healthy as I am.
Yeah.
And so like I get where in particular with that with like there there is an argument for somebody who's like 50 pounds overweight. Like yes, at a certain point worrying about your body composition is going to affect your health and performance.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, like the thing that you need to do first is build the engine. You have to build the calorie sink first. And obviously, like if you eat like a fucking drunk trash panda the whole time, like maybe you might not get healthier. But in my opinion, until you can put down like 1,000 kilojoules a day, 6 days a week, don't fucking worry about the food. Like eat to fuel your training. And then once we build you a pretty fucking good engine and you're still like, oh, I'm not as fast as I want to be, or my doctor still thinks I'm unhealthy, then maybe we can start to think about like, okay, how can we in super subtle ways start pulling back a little calories and build you a little calorie deficit. But fucking hell, people, like if you're even remotely worried about performance, you need to be thinking so much more about fueling your training than you do about body composition. Like it's not even fucking close until you are at the national level. And really, I think like I'm going to keep going because I had this thought today. And I think the reason for that is that fitness compounds and weight and the gains you get from fitness compounds and the gains you get from weight do not.
Yeah,
you cannot keep
cost basically. It's
exactly. Yeah. Like you can get light, and you're going to like, but at a certain point you cannot keep getting lighter.
Right.
But if you've lost 6 months of training because you were under fueling to try to get light, you can't get those 6 months back. Like it's going to take you even fucking longer to get an actual good engine. So like ultimately you're going to get to the place that you want to be way faster if you gain fitness first and worry about the weight second.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your post about the earning the fuck you money that you're talking about today is, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. Like I end up talking with athletes about fitness should sort of be, like a mythical stock exchange that does like continue to go up and correct over time and that sort of thing, because fitness does compound. That's a great way to put it. Like fitness compounds, body composition doesn't. And especially if you're putting the body composition first, which then blocks everything.
Everything. Yep. 100%. I like that stock exchange analogy.
Unfortunately, if you're like me, you then have to explain how like normal stock exchanges don't ever function like that. And like, this is the problem with like a hardcore humanities background is you're like, oh, this extended metaphor is beginning to break down. You know what it needs? It needs more words. And I'm like, no, shut up, Chris. Stop.
Oh shit. Yeah, I get into that. I'm like with that Substack stuff that I'm working on right now, I am trying to really refine some of these analogies that I've been using for years and like expand them. And that the fuck you money one, that's like the fourth or fifth revision of that to try to like, no, I don't need to explain that to, and I don't need to explain that to, and I don't need to expand on or introduce this other variable. I just need to like get the fucking point across and keep it small.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you? Because people should go find you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I do still have a bunch of stuff on Instagram. I didn't like delete my account or anything. And I think there's a lot of really good information out there, especially the Reels part, if you're interested about SkiMo transition and technique, and the regular posts if you're interested in learning about training, general training theory type stuff. So that's at Badass Coach. I likely will not be putting anything new on there for a long time, but there's a lot of good shit on there, I think. And then my coaching website is summitenduranceacademy.com. And you can find, if you just go into like my blog, I think it's just like education blog.
Mhm.
That'll take you to my Substack, which is Coach Howdy at coachhowdy.substack.com. um, that's where I'm putting out the most stuff. If you have a question or want to buy me coffee or some shit, it's joe at summitenduranceacademy.com is my email. And yeah, that's most of it.
That's
You
awesome.
want to come
Yeah.
ski? Come to Breckenridge.
Yeah, I do. I mean, when I've been skiing my whole life. It was like sort of bullshit alpine in New England growing up. And okay, I guess this is fun. I'm cold and I'm gonna crash. And then I was teaching at a school in Vermont where I suddenly realized that if I did not have skis, there would be days that I would not be able to teach. And so
Yeah.
and that was a really cool school. It was this like a sort of socialist artistic school with like a really good cross country ski program.
Yeah.
So like the ultimate jock nerd school.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I've had cross country skis for a long time, but when I retired from racing triathlon a few years ago, a friend of mine was like, "Hey, you cross country ski, you should do the Berkey." And I was like, "What's the
Uh-huh.
Berkey?" and like and now I'm just like, "Oh, I love this. This is the and realized like, oh, actually this is the sport that I am the correct size for." At like at like
Yeah.
at like 6'2", 180, too small to be a heavyweight rower,
Yep.
too big to be a runner, a cyclist, or a triathlete. Like these days,
Hmm.
like professional triathletes are you're either the 5'9", 145 guy, or you're like apparently like 6'7" and like 75 kilograms.
Yeah.
Like that's
Right.
the other model.
Right.
And
Yep.
like, yeah, and too small to play. Like, and I was like, oh, I should have been a skier. Like, this is the
Yeah.
size that I
Yeah. Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
This is what I should have been doing the whole time. And I love it. And it feels
Yeah.
like the thing where I was like, oh, I could have been good at this. But
Yeah.
it's very nice to discover the sport that you love once you have like finished doing the sport that you were trying to do for your living.
Yeah. 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 Well, and like, yeah, I feel like one of the things that I really appreciate about finding SkiMo later in life after I had all of my coach's education is that like I fucked up a lot of training when I was younger.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, I can learn this cool new sport while having the tools to actually like improve fairly quickly at it. And now like the fucking life stability and disposable income to like be able to hire my own coach and have the required gear and all of
Mhm.
that shit. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's later sports are fun.
They are fun. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So, this is awesome, man. I my publishing schedule looks like this would probably be like a mid-December or early January. I only publish every 2 weeks, and so like any good podcaster, I'm terrified, and I have a bunch of footage in the can. So that's probably when you'll see it come out, but I'll let you know before it shows up. But I'm also like just really trying to like build a network of other coaches. Like I'm just like this is a lonely job. And
Oh God, yes,
I've
yes.
realized in the past like year that like just sitting behind my computer and yelling at the internet is not going to like do it. And so I really appreciate you being willing to do this and like hang out for a bit. And yeah, I hope we keep like chatting on Substack and places like that.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great, and I love like your questions are I think really good and insightful and yeah, I actually have like a small group of not coaches, but
Mhm.
like a couple massage therapists and a dietitian and a PT and actually another coach who I like found to have coffee with
Oh,
so that
nice.
we can like bitch about athletes
The the
altogether.
stitch and bitch. Yeah.
Because, yeah, exactly. Because you're totally fucking right, man. It is so isolating.
Yeah.
It's like it's it's awesome because we can work from where we want to and we can work with athletes wherever the fuck they need to be. But yeah, it is isolating as hell. So yeah, let's have more chats, man, for sure.
I love it. Awesome. Well,
Awesome.
thanks. And yeah, have a great rest of your evening. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man. You as
All right.
well. Chat
See you,
soon.
Joe.
Bye.
Thanks.